that organisms will soon.
Why is this not?
Darwin's observations and readings led him to discover the theory of evolution by natural selection. Darwin observed that
Oh my
organisms
God,
are well
why is
suited
it
to
not
their
working?
environment, related species live relatively close to one another, and fossils resembled modern-day organisms. Darwin also read the principles of geology, introduced to the idea of gradualism. Gradualism is the idea that slow changes happen over time, which this too supported the idea of natural selection. Evolution has four mechanisms, which are mutations, gene flow, genetic drift, and natural selection as stated previously. Mutations are random changes in DNA sequencing due to errors in replication. These is the source of new alleles. Gene flow is when individuals emigrate or immigrate, adding, removing, or changing the frequency of alleles. Genetic drift happens when changes in allele frequency due to the change of alleles, these can give rise to speciation concepts. We begin with the biological species concept. This is where a group of populations whose members have potential to interbreed in nature and produce fertile offspring. Separate species will then become reproductively isolated. The biological species concept can be problematic for hybrids, extinct and asexual organisms. Why? Hybridization is when two species come together and produce an offspring, which the biological species concept says does not happen. Extinct, we can't really study this way. And asexual organisms are able to reproduce successfully with themselves. We then have the morphological species concept, which is that different species have a distinct appearance. This is subjective because there's no definitive way to decide which traits to use. On the other hand, phylogenetic species concept of shared ancestry based on shared, derived traits and molecular data, allopatric speciation is where all have geographic barriers. Populations can eventually evolve other reproductive abilities. For example, maples trees, Asa, from North America and Europe. These are the same species, however, due to a geographic barrier they can no longer reproduce together. Allopatric speciation can be a result of genetic drift, changing of allele frequency and types, or natural selection. Sympatric speciation, so it has no barrier. Populations become reproductively isolated in the absence of geographic barriers, Autopolyploidy happens when errors in the gametes end with double the amount of chromosomes. This produces reproductively isolated offspring from parent species. Allopolyploidy is when two different species form a hybrid offspring that is reproductively isolated from parent species. Recombination is where hybrids are able to sexually reproduce with other hybrids but not with parent species, There are three domains including eukarya, archaea, and bacteria. The eukarya and bacteria are more closely related to one another. The defining characteristics of eukarya include organelles, including a nucleus surrounded by a nuclear envelope, introns, histone proteins, and some members contain chlorophyll for conducting photosynthesis. The defining characteristics of archaea are prokaryotic cells, single circular chromosome, and histone proteins. The defining characteristics of bacteria are prokaryotic cells, single circular chromosome, and some members contain chlorophyll for conducting photosynthesis, Molecular data can inform phylogenetic analysis by giving a DNA analysis to see if organisms are indeed closely related to one another, Important terms ideas. Analogy, asimilarity resulting from convergent evolution. Binomial nomenclature, genus name plus species name equals genus species. Branch, connects a living organism. Coevolution, interacting species exert strong selective pressures on each other. Convergent evolution, similarities due to similar adaptations favored by a common environment. Ecotype, genetically distinct populations adapted to different environments. Fitness, describes the extent which allele affects reproductive success relative to other alleles. Gene pool, all of the gene variants, alleles, within a population. Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium, demonstrates that under certain conditions allele frequencies can remain constant from generation to generation. The conditions that have to be met are random mating and no evolution. Homology, similarities due to shared ancestry evolving from the same structure from a common ancestor. Monophyletic group, clade, contains common ancestor and all of its descendants. Node, represents most common ancestor. Outgroup, is a taxon that isn't a member of the group being studied. Parsimony, simplest explanation for an observation. Population genetics, study of genetic variation and change in populations, groups of breeding conspecifics in the same area. Reciprocal transplant, growing plants from each population at each location. If trait difference between the populations remain in new locations, it's due to genetic variation. If it has lower reproductive success in new area, it is due to adaptation. Syneomorphy, traits inherited from common ancestor and are inherited in all descendants.